I'm going to read for you two little narratives. The first you may be familiar with, and I don't do it just to be humorous. I do it to prove a point. And the second one is far more serious on a philosophical basis. So pardon me if you're familiar with this, but I have a reason for it. Well, Sam, will you tell me the parable of the Good Samaritan? Yes, sir, I will, sir. Once there was this man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among thorns, and the thorns sprung up and choked him. And as he went on, he didn't have any money, and so he met the Queen of Sheba, and she gave him 1,000 talents of gold and 1,000 changes of raiment. And he got into a chariot and drove furiously. And when he was driving under a big juniper tree, his hair caught on the limb of that tree, and he hung there many days, and the ravens brought him food to eat and water to drink, and he ate 5,000 loaves of bread and 2 fishes. One night when he was hanging there asleep, his wife Delilah come along and cut off his hair, and he dropped and fell on stony ground. But he got up and went on, and began to reign, and it rained 40 days and 40 nights. And he hid himself in a cave, and he lived on locusts and wild honey. Then he went on till he met a servant who said, "Come take supper at my house." And he made excuse and said, "No, I won't. I've married a wife and I can't go." And the servant went in the highways and the hedges and compelled him to come in. After supper he went on and come on down to Jericho. And when he got there, he looked up and saw that old Queen Jezebel sitting way up high on a window. And she laughed at him, and he said, "Throw her down out there." And they threw her down. And he said, "Throw her down again." And they threw her down again, 70 times 7. And of the fragments that remained, they picked up 12 baskets full, besides women and children. And they said, "Blessed are the peacemakers," Piece. Now, whose wife do you think she will be on that judgment day? Brilliant. But you have to know your Bible to see what a mess he's made of a story. One of the fine writers on moral reasoning is a man by the name of Alasdair MacIntyre. After Virtue, and prior to that, he'd written Whose Justice, Which Rationality? And may I mention 2 other books, is Man the Measure by Dr. Geisler, and Ethics, Alternatives and Issues by Norman Geisler. Now, this is a bit more convoluted because he's using a completely different illustration to prove the same point I have just made about the scriptures. And here's what he says. Imagine if the natural sciences were to suffer the effects of a catastrophe. A series of environmental disasters are blamed by the general public on the scientists. Widespread riots occur, laboratories are burnt down, physicists are lynched, books and instruments are destroyed. Finally, a know-nothing political movement takes power and successfully abolishes science teaching in schools and universities, imprisoning and executing the remaining scientists. Later still, there is a reaction against this destructive movement, and enlightened people will seek to revive science, although they have largely forgotten what it was. But all that they possess are fragments, a knowledge of experiments detached from any knowledge of the theoretical context which gave them significance. Parts of theories unrelated to each other, bits and pieces of theory which they possess or to experiment. Instruments whose use has been forgotten, half chapters from books, single pages from articles, not always fully legible because torn and charred. Nonetheless, all these fragments are re-embodied in a set of practices which undergo the revived names of physics, chemistry, and biology. Adults argue with each other about the respective merits of relativity theory, evolutionary theory, although they possess only a very partial knowledge of each. Children learn by heart the surviving portions of the periodic table and recite as incantations some of the theorems of Euclid. Nobody or almost nobody realizes that what they are doing is not natural science in any proper sense at all, for everything that they do and say conforms to certain canons of consistency and coherence, and those contexts which would be needed to make sense of what they are doing, and of what they are doing have been lost, perhaps irretrievably. What is the point of my constructing this imaginary world inhabited by the fictitious pseudoscientists and real, genuine philosophy? The hypothesis which I wish to advance is that in the actual world which we inhabit, the language of morality is in the same state of grave disorder as the language of natural science. In the imaginary world which I described, What we possess, if this view is true, are fragments of a conceptual scheme, parts which now lack those contexts from which their significance derived. We possess, indeed, a notion of morality. We continue to use many of the key expressions, but we have very largely, if not entirely, lost our comprehension, both theoretical and practical, of morality. This is how MacIntyre begins his work on the struggle for virtue. And his history is a sweeping expose of going all the way back to Aristotle and coming down to more recent times of nihilism a la Nietzsche, or the emptiness and meaninglessness of existentialist philosophers. I think it's a very powerful illustration that he has given to us of the fragmentary state in which we find our ethical world. Let me give you an illustration that may be a bit provocative, but I think it makes the point. Imagine today when you see and talk to medical doctors debating the issue of abortion, where some may hold the view, and some are advocating the view, that this can even be done a little after the child is born. So even a medical practitioner can enter into that terrain of saying, we have a right to do this, don't we? Now, I know that's a thorny illustration, but why do I give that? Just this week, a story broke of the one man who remained silent from the smuggling out of Adolf Eichmann in the 60s from Argentina back to Jerusalem. We all know some of the names, Peter Malkin and the others from the Mossad who were involved in that cloak and dagger operation, got into Argentina, spotted where he lived, and through binoculars and all, somehow tracked him down. And the whole scheme is written in the book, The House on Garibaldi Street. It's a brilliant narrative. But what that narrative tells you is when they finally got him, one key person had a syringe in his hand in the car, jabbed it into Eichmann's arm, and rendered him almost unconscious, but not completely unconscious. They had to give just the right amount of that anesthetic so that he could be a zombie obeying orders, but not able to ask any questions. They rendered him in that halfway house of being totally unconscious to making complete sense. They put on him a uniform of a pilot for El Al and took him in on a stretcher and loaded him on the plane in order to bring him back for trial in Jerusalem. The one man who never said anything about the whole process was the doctor that gave him the injection. Until recently. And he died at the age of 91. And his son kept saying to him, "Why, Dad? Why did you never, ever say a word about the critical role you played, without which they would never have brought him here?" And he shocked his son. He said, "When I took the Hippocratic Oath, I took the oath not to harm anybody. And as I was called upon to play this role, what was struggling in my mind was, am I doing well as a doctor to render this man semi-conscious? Or is it outweighing in my heart the death of millions of my fellow countrymen at the behest and order of this man?" Just think of how ethics has changed, how values have changed. Here is a man thinking of an oath he had made as a medical practitioner. Today, when we talk about life and death issues, those oaths have nothing to do anymore with the decisions we make, either in politics or in medicine, or for that matter, in many other professions of our kind. If you look at the old oaths that engineers took, when they were given an engineering license, my father-in-law was a chemical engineer, he showed me the oath that he had to take. Every oath had a moral framework given to it that they would do what was honorable.